Hello boys and girls, before we get started on our math lesson for today, I want to be sure that you have all of the materials that you're going to need. So the first thing that you're going to need is 2 or 3 small squares. Post-it notes make a great square. If you don't have any, you can create your own squares on paper. Once you have your post-it notes, make sure you also have scissors, crayons, the Geoboard recording paper, which is linked in this assignment, and access to your digital geoboards. So get those things together and then we'll get ready to get started. All right, so today what I want to teach you is that there is more than one way to partition a square to make fourths. 4 fourths make up one whole, and equal shares of identical wholes don't have to be made up of the same shape. So let's get started. What I would like for you to do right now is to take out your squares. So I'm going to get out my squares. I have post-it notes that I'm going to be using just like last time. I'm going to take out 3 post-it notes. Okay, so very similar to what we were doing last time, I want you to take a look at these post-it notes and think about different ways you could split them up into 4 equal parts. So you want to take these post-it notes and you want to split them up into 4 equal parts. You can do that by drawing lines, by folding, or another way that works best for you. Go ahead and try that out now. All right, so this is my example of 4 equal shares, or 4 fourths. This time I only made one example, but hopefully you have at least 2 or 3. So I want you to take a look at your squares and how you chose to partition them, and I want you to ask yourself, does the partitioning you did equal 4 parts? Are the 4 parts equal? And how do you know? So again, did you create 4 parts? Are those 4 parts equal? And how do you know? Think about how you could explain that to somebody who wasn't sure. I also want you to try out using these 2 sentence frames. I divided my square into 4 equal shares by, and I know the shares are equal because. So I'm going to give you an example. So if I was to use these sentence frames, I might say I divided my square into 4 equal shares by first cutting vertically in half, then cutting horizontally in half. I know that my shares are equal because I could cut them out and stack them on top of each other almost perfectly. So for this part of our lesson, I would like for you to make sure that you have access to your digital geoboard as well as your geoboard recording paper. You have another one of these big squares, and then we also have a sheet with all of the little mini squares. So we're going to start working with your big square first. So what I would like for you to do with me is create another square that takes up your whole geoboard. So remember, we're using the square geoboard, and we're going to use the whole geoboard to make one big square. So I'm going to use blue today. I'm going to grab and drag all the way over here. And then I'm going to make a big square. So your square should look like this. It should take up your entire geoboard. The next thing that you're going to do is split this square into 4 equal parts. You're partitioning this square into equal fourths. So I'm going to use a different color to partition. Remember, I told you that I first split it vertically, and vertically means straight up and down. This line that I just put down the middle in yellow is a vertical line. So I split it in half vertically. Now I have 2 halves. I'm going to grab a third color to show how I split it horizontally. So I split it horizontally like this. So now I have 4 equal parts. Do you see how I have 4 squares that make up my big square, and they are all equal? So that's one example of how you could partition this square into 4 equal parts. What I would like for you to do now is to make sure that you draw this picture on your big geoboard paper. I'm going to do that now too. So here's my geoboard, which matches up with the geoboard on the screen. So now what you're going to do is try to partition your square into as many other ways that you could split it up into equal fourths. And you're going to record those different ways on your geoboard recording paper. This is very similar to our last lesson, except instead of splitting into halves, you're splitting into fourths. So go ahead and get started working with your digital geoboard and your geoboard recording paper. Once you've filled those up, or filled up as many as you can, then we will come back together for the next part of our lesson. All right, boys and girls, so there are a few things that I really want you to take away from this lesson. One of the things that I want you to remember is that there's more than one way to partition a square to make fourths. I also want you to remember that 4 fourths equal 1 whole. The third thing that I want you to remember is that equal shares of identical wholes need not have the same shape. So what that means is different shapes can make up the whole than what the whole actually is. These shapes are triangles, these 4 triangles, the whole that they are making up is a square. So let's take a look at some of these examples that I have here. These are all examples of a square divided or partitioned into equal fourths, or 4 equal parts. So I want you to take a look at these squares, and I want you to ask yourself, how do you know that the parts are equal? And what is each part called? Think about that for a moment. How do you know that the parts are equal, and what is each part called? So each of these parts is called a fourth, right? It's 1/4 of the whole. 1/4 of the whole. So we know that these are equal parts because, well, we could count up the dots. We could also think about if we were to cut these pieces out, could we stack them on top of each other and have them be perfect? All 3 of these examples are equal fourths that could stack on top of each other perfectly to show a perfect square. Each of these fourths makes up a whole square. All right, now I want to show you a couple of examples of shapes of squares that have been partitioned into fourths, but these fourths are not equal. They do not show equal parts, and the individual parts don't add up to a whole. So here we have a square that was split into equal halves, right? When we split it down the middle, but down here, this line makes it so that these shares are not equal. So if I was to cut out one of these little shares and then cut out 3 more of these little shares, they would not make up the same shape that we have here. Similarly, with these bigger rectangles, these 2 rectangles, if I was to cut these out and then cut out 2 more, we wouldn't have the same shape. So we know that these shares are not equal. It's also pretty apparent to see that they're not the same size. Another similar example looks like this. You can see here that these shares are not equal, right? These little triangles are a lot smaller than these sort of rectangle-like shapes. Maybe we would just call these quadrilaterals. So they're not all made up of the same shape, and they're definitely not equal. I have another example that I drew on my Geoboard paper that I'm going to show you, and then I'm going to show you how to draw, because I want every single one of you to draw this one on your Geoboard recording paper, okay? So let's take a look at this example here. Take a look at it for a second. What do you think? Does this one show 4 equal shares? How do you know? Think about it for a second. All right, I'm going to show you how to draw it. So, the first thing that you're going to do when you draw this geoboard is start here. You're going to count 1, 2, 1, 2. Then you're going to go down the side and you're going to count 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. There we go. Then you're going to draw from 1 to 2 here. You're going to bring it in, 1, 2, You're going to bring it in on the other side. 1, 2. You're going to take it down. 1, 2. And repeat. 1, 2. And then close off the shape. So now we have one of these little T-like shapes. Let's do the next one. So we already have this line here, the first 1, 2. From here, you're going to go 1, 2, 3, 4. You're going to go down, 2. You're going to go over, 2. You're going to go down, 2. And you're going to close off that shape. Let's do the third one. Ready? We're going to start here. We're going to go 1, 2, 3, 4. We're going to go down 1, over 1, down 1, close off the shape. And then the last one here will go 1, 2, 3, 4. You'll go down, and it's already closed off for you. All right, I want you to take a look at this example with these T-like shapes. So, how can we be sure that all 4 of these shares are equal? I want you to now cut out your shapes and stack them on top of each other. Go ahead and do that now. Cut out your shapes and stack them on top of each other. All right, I have my 4 little T's in my hands, and I'm going to stack them on top of each other. 1, 2, 3, 4. So I'm noticing that they stack on top of each other quite nicely. So these 4 pieces are equal, and each of these shapes make up the whole, which is the square. This is what we were talking about earlier. Just because these individual pieces aren't squares doesn't mean that they can't come together to create a square. So think about those sentence frames from earlier and think, how could you explain that the shares are equal? The sentence starters are, we divided the square into 4 equal shares by, and we know that the shares are equal because. Think about how you could fill in the blanks in those sentences. All right, boys and girls, before we wrap up this lesson, I just want to review a few important terms with you. So we've talked a lot about partitioning. Please pause this video now and think, what does it mean to partition something, and how could you explain it in your own words? If you said that partitioning means to cut something up, or to divide it up, or something like that, then you are right. Partitioning means cutting up, in our case, a shape to make it into smaller parts. All right, I have a new anchor chart up here today for you that says equal shares, equal shares. So pause this video again and think, what are equal shares? If you're not sure, you could refer back to our video from our last math lesson. So equal shares are the parts of a shape that make up the whole, right? So on this anchor chart here, I have some examples of equal shares. So from our first math lesson that we've done virtually, we talked about halves, right? And there are 2 halves. There are 2 halves in a whole. Here we have a rectangle that's split in halves, a square that's split in halves, and a circle that's split into halves. So the number of shares are 2. And the name of those shares are halves. In a whole shape here, there are 2 halves. This down here is from our lesson today. Today we talked about fourths. So I have a rectangle split into fourths, a square split into fourths, and a circle that's split into fourths. The number of shares here are 4. They are called fourths, and there are 4 fourths in a whole. Remember that sometimes when we split something up into both halves or fourths, it might be split into shapes that are different than what the whole is. For example, this square is split into 2 halves, and these halves are not squares, right? They're triangles. Down here we have this example where this rectangle is split into fourths, and it's split into 4 rectangles. So it can happen that way, but it doesn't have to. This square here is also split into triangles. All right, boys and girls, That wraps up our math lesson for today. I hope that you enjoyed it, and I can't wait to see some of your work. Make sure to upload either your small Geoboard paper, your larger Geoboard paper, or a screenshot of your Geoboard online. So if you use your digital Geoboard and you want to upload some samples from there, take a screenshot and make sure to attach. It's really important that you're attaching your work so that Miss Wan, Miss Chadwick, and I can give you feedback and see that you're getting your work done. All right, boys and girls, that's all for today. Have a great rest of your Monday. Bye.